I watched a cartoon on Wednesday evening after the day had wound down. This is about 9:30. Went to YouTube and I looked up Life with Louie cartoons. I needed to laugh a little bit in the sadness of Louie's death a week ago. The episode I looked up was a Christmas episode. Louie and his dad in this cartoon are out in the yard, in the dark, in the snow, putting up the Christmas lights, and Louie's dad typically is not really into it. Doesn't feel the spirit of the season, and he's just kind of haphazardly putting them up, and the squirrels could use it too, and he flings some of it, the light cord up onto the tree, and it's fine. And while he's doing that, Louie looks across the street and notices that Mrs. Stillman across the street has no decorations on her house. There's no lights, no nothing. And he points this out, and his dad says, well, since Mr. Stillman died, she probably has nobody to put the lights up. She's probably too poor anyway to afford it. And he just kind of turns away. Well, Louie doesn't let go of it, and he comes inside. They come in after they finish putting the lights up on their house, and he talks to his mom about it, and she thinks on it and then hatches a plan. And she comes out and she said, I'm going to take Mrs. Stillman grocery shopping. It'll take a couple hours, maybe 3. That's just enough time for you two to go and put lights up on Mrs. Stillman's house. We've got an extra box of Christmas lights in the garage. You can take those over and put them up and do a better job on her house than you're doing on ours. And Dad is not pleased at this, but he's generally displeased, so it's not unusual. So Louie's mom and Mrs. Stillman go grocery shopping. Louie and his dad go over across the street with a ladder and the lights. And Louie's dad is up on the ladder, at the second story, just starting to string the lights. And some neighborhood kids come by, and again, this is after dark, and they think he's a burglar trying to break into Mrs. Stillman's house, so they pelt him with snowballs. And he sort of panics and kicks the ladder out, and he's hanging there by the gutters, yelling. And Louie comes around the corner and says, it's my dad, stop. And so then the kids gather around and they put the ladder back up so his dad can get down. And while he watches, then they all scatter and get their extra lights and decorations from their houses. And they bring them and they go into action decorating the place. So they've got Christmas lights on her house, and they've got Santa Claus, and they've got Frosty the Snowman, and they've got angels and Santa and reindeer and elves and everything, just all over the place. So when she comes home with Louie's mom, Mrs. Stillman gets out of the car, the house is all lit up. The yard is full of all of these lit up Christmas articles. And she says, this is just so lovely. And she invites them all in for hot chocolate and cookies. And she sits down at the piano and she plays. And they sing Jingle Bells and they sing some other things. When the episode ends, you hear Louie as the narrator, as the scene of her house at night, all lit up and decorated. The camera pulls away. And Louie says, we learn later on why Mrs. Stillman didn't have any lights or decorations for Christmas on her house. She is Jewish. Which I'd seen the episode before and it cracked me up and it still cracks me up. It's so funny and so well done and so touching and so sort of sad and so real and honest. I recalled a piece from a book that I've had for a long time. The book is called Listening to Your Life, Daily Meditations with Frederick Buechner, and it's full of pieces taken from all of his different writings. And the very first one, for January 1st, he says this: I discovered that if you really keep your eye peeled to it and your ears open, if you really pay attention to it, even such a limited and limiting life as the one I was living opened up onto extraordinary vistas. Taking your children to school and kissing your wife goodbye, eating lunch with a friend, trying to do a decent day's work, hearing the rain patter against the window. There is no event so commonplace, but that God is present within it, always hiddenly, always leaving you room to recognize or not recognize God. But all the more fascinatingly because of that, all the more compellingly and hauntingly. If I were called upon to state in a few words the essence of everything I was trying to say, both as a novelist and as a preacher, it would be something like this. Listen to your life. See it for the fathomless mystery that it is. In the boredom and pain of it, no less than in the excitement and gladness. Touch, taste, smell your way to the holy and hidden heart of it, because in the last analysis, all moments are key moments, and life itself is grace. Listen to your life, all of it. Not just the good stuff, but the other stuff too. And so we do. We start here. And we move from listening to our lives and how they overlap with listening to life with Louis, now to listening to paying attention to life with Jesus. And the part of the story in the gospel that we hear today, as we listen in, I wonder if you were a PR person that Jesus hired, would you include this part in the promotional materials? I'm just not so sure it's that helpful to Jesus' promotion. It's when he comes home to his hometown and he gives his first sermon in the synagogue after having been baptized and having become clear in his head who he is and gone into the desert and had his temptations and his time of testing. He comes home, he's in the synagogue on the Sabbath, and he reads from the prophet Isaiah. Actually, I think he recites from the prophet Isaiah with a little bit of Isaiah 58 worked in there. He says, the Spirit of God is upon me. The life, the energy, the power of God has taken hold and has turned loose in me. So I'm sent to bring good news to the poor. Freedom to the prisoners of violence and war. Recovery of sight to those who cannot see God in the world anymore. Liberation to all who are held down by an oppressor. And to announce the time of God's favor. And then you remember, it's very deliberate. He rolls up the scroll, we're told, and he gives the scroll back to the attendant, and he sits down, and it's quiet, and everybody is looking at him, and there's this pregnant pause, and then he says, today, this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing. Today. This promise of God comes to be as you receive it, as it sounds and resounds in and through your life. It comes alive. And the response initially is, yes, that's wonderful. Maybe a little applause is in order. Tell us more. So what happens? This thing, according to Luke, goes so dramatically and seemingly immediately off the rails. What and why? What's going on? Well, it's because Jesus tells them more. Maybe he should have just stopped while he was ahead. And he quotes a couple proverbs about maybe he's needing to take care of himself before he tells them what to do, and maybe he's a prophet who's not going to be honored here. And then he reminds them of a couple of instances in their history, of which there are many, in which troubled times, because of their behavior as a people, interpreting it, because of the way they were behaving towards God, God goes to some unchosen people to bless them and lift them up and call them out, rather than the chosen people. Well, how does that land with you? You wonder. When one of your own tells you, you might be God's chosen people, but you can be very ungodly people sometimes. You can be ungodly jerks. Just like I can tell you and myself that we may be Christian people, but we can be very unchristian sometimes to each other. We can be jerks. And so maybe then in those times, God looks elsewhere for people to lift up who will answer the call and take on the work. Because isn't that it? Isn't that at least in part, what this is about. Jesus comes home to Nazareth with this spirited promise, this blessing, but it's not to dump it there for them to just indulge in. It's to engage them in the work itself, in bringing the promise to life, in living it out. And it doesn't go so well, according to the report. Bill Easum once said, "New life comes to you on its way to other people." New life comes from God to you on its way to other people, suggesting there's more than just you in the picture. There's more than just our tribal interests and our tribal God in the picture here that we need to concern ourselves with. That's what Jesus is telling them. And that's not always a popular message. Today, this promise comes alive in you or it does not. And if it's going to, it's because you are going to claim it and let it lift you up and take you beyond the bounds of your tribe to people you maybe don't even like very much. And how does he preface that part where he tells them those stories of ugliness in their past? He begins it by saying, "But the truth is," and it's almost a throwaway line. I blasted past it the first couple times I read it. But the truth is. But the truth is. But the truth is. A year ago, just over, on January 6th, there was a riot in our national capital. There was an insurrection, an uprising. A whole group of people stirred up by the man who was still president at the time went and broke into the Capitol and injured people and made a mess of things and did their best to throw off the cliff the truth of an election they didn't want to receive and didn't want to accept. And the denial ever since then on the part of even some of those who were there and endangered at the time, the denial of what went on continues. And it is emblematic of a deep denial in our national character, where we want to be exceptional and we want to talk about the good things that we see about ourselves, but we don't want to talk about the other stuff. We are just and gracious and courageous and creative and powerful, but we're also racist and violent and exploitive and exclusionary and sometimes downright murderous, genocidal of others. Listen to your life, Buechner says, your individual life, your collective life, where your life overlaps with others. And not just the good stuff and the happy stuff, but the hard stuff and the painful stuff. Because the truth is, the promise of God, that truth is on the way to it. The whole truth. Louis Anderson grew up in St. Paul, a local boy, Minnesotan through and through. He became a nationally known comedian in the 80s and 90s. He died a week ago Friday, the 21st of January. He was 68 years old. And it seemed very sudden. And he seems quite young, given that I'm moving towards 66. That's really close. Well, Neil Justin wrote a story, a column, a feature about him in the Star Trib on Tuesday. I was going to bring it along because I had a picture of him, and I got Otis's toy, but I didn't get the newspaper section. He starts the article saying, there were times when I felt sorry for Louis Anderson. Louis had this long, successful run as a stand-up comedian appearing on the Johnny Carson's show, sort of breaking out then and showing up all over the place across the country on TV. He hosted a game show for a while. He had that series, that cartoon series, Life with Louis. He had a couple books, and he had a short series of his own for a while on TV. But by 2003, he had just sort of tailed off and faded from the scene. And he would come back to Minnesota occasionally to perform. And when he was coming back, he would call up Neil Justin at the Star Trib, and they would have this chat. And then Louis would ask if maybe Justin wanted to promote his appearances locally in his writings, his column. And Justin said the conversation was always pleasant because Louis was just a sweet man. But he said, I often hung up feeling kind of sad. Poor has-been Louis, he thought. He said, I now realize how wrong I was. So it was in 2014-15, right in there, that Louis landed a part on this series Baskets. And it was about these twin brothers, both played by Zach Galifianakis. And Louis landed the role of their mother. And he modeled his portrayal of her on his own mother, whom he loved dearly. A sweet woman, but kind of nosy and busy, maybe busier than she should have been. Well, Louis was awarded an Emmy for that role. And Justin, writing about that, he said, I thought maybe then that he would turn his back on me. You know, nice to hear from you, but I'm kind of busy. Sort of the way I treated him, didn't give him the time and attention maybe he deserved, and now this would be revenge. He said, it couldn't have been further from the truth. Louis wasn't that way. He said, he gave me front row seat to one of the greatest comeback stories in show business history. Yeah. Inviting him to parties, to awards events, to other events where Louis' celebrity brought him into those places now, and he'd invite Justin along. He said he stayed in touch with me. He would let me know when he was coming to town. He would alert me to new comedians on the rise who I might want to watch and write about and pay attention to, helping Justin with his job. And when Louis would come back, sometimes the two of them would go to a comedy club and sit and listen to the comedians, and Louis would then comment, sort of gentle critique of what just was said, what just happened, and how that might have been better if this had happened or that had been done. Justin said it was like a graduate class in comedy. He was a master, and he worked so hard at it, and he was so good at it. He said, toward the end, Louis was digging deeper, more a storyteller than a joke teller. He was opening up in new, more challenging ways about his battle with his weight and his relationship with his father, a sometimes violent alcoholic. It wasn't just funny. It was touching. It was moving. It was real. It was honest. Listen to your life, Buechner says. Listen, touch, taste, smell your way all the way to the holy heart of it, as hard as that may be, because that is where the promise of God is. That is where God is found. That is where your own wholeness and the wholeness of all those around you is cracked open, is bestowed, is accessed, if you will. Jesus comes home. And he lets his neighbors, friends, people who know him, know why he's there, what he's all about. And then he calls them into it to join him. This spirited promise that he feels that has taken hold of him, he wants to engage them in sharing it with the world and bringing it to life. But the truth is, that promise has to go through the truth that surrounds us, the good and the bad, the painful and the wonderful, all of the non-tribal outside stuff, all of the biases, all of that junk that we know about but don't want to talk about, that stands in the way of. We have to go through that to live into the promise of God. It's all on the way there. At the end of his story, in the paper, Justin recalls a late-night phone conversation with Louis. And he said, Louis sensed that I was feeling down. If you ever need to talk, give me a ring, Louis says. I'm good at cheering people up. And Justin concludes the column, I wish I could call him right now. When I finished it, it struck me. Justin was doing the very thing that he saw Louis doing. Going deeper. Going to where the regret and the pain and the sorrow, as well as the gratitude and the joy are. And lifting those things up, confessing them, bringing them to the surface, listening to his life, all of it. But the truth is, Jesus says, the truth is on the way to the promise of God, to the wholeness of our own lives and our world. Jesus' own community could not go that way. They couldn't do it. They refused. What about us? Will we? Are we willing to go that way? Amen.